Hey everybody, welcome to episode 17 of the Movement as Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Carr. I believe when I intro this later on the podcast with our guest, I actually say it's episode 16, but ignore that because I never know which episode it is without Brendan reminding me, and he wasn't available for this one. And this episode was really awesome. I sat and I interviewed my friend Josh Funk, Dr. Josh Funk, I should say specifically. And he is the owner and founder of Rehab2Perform, which is a physical therapy clinic located in the Maryland area. They have 7 locations. They're just about to expand their 8th into Virginia. And we had a great talk about all things business, physical therapy, growing as a practitioner from being, the physical therapist or being the coach if you're a fitness person listening to this, and changing your mindset into becoming a CEO, a business owner, so that your business can scale effectively in all of the things you need to do to be able to do that. I really enjoyed it. He's someone who I've known for a handful of years, and I've been able to watch him grow his business in a fairly short time to a really impressive operation. And seeing him grow as an individual just from the outside in, and how he looks at managing and running a business. And he gave some amazing insights. He was very honest about his experiences, the mistakes he's made, the things that he's learned, and kind of how he's grown. And I think as a fitness professional or physical therapist listening to this would be a really, really good listen for you to help you realize, what's possible. I think a lot of people in this field have an entrepreneurial mindset. They want to work for themselves. They have an idea of starting a business, but the idea is too intimidating to be able to grow and scale effectively. And so to learn from someone who in a fairly short time has done an amazing job growing a really amazing business, scaling to multiple locations, there's some really great gems you can get out of this interview. So I really think you're going to enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time. Hey everybody, welcome to the Movement is Medicine podcast. This is episode 16. I'm your host, Kevin Carr, and today we have a very special guest. I'm going to be interviewing and talking with my friend Josh Funk of Rehab2Perform. And thanks for coming on, Josh. Appreciate you having here.
Absolutely. Big fan of your guys over the years, the whole MBSC fam, and the definitely fan of what you guys are doing with the Certified Functional Strength Coach as well. So just happy to be on here and happy to be able to share a little bit.
Yeah, and so I'm going to have you kind of introduce yourself, but I think you and I probably met, I don't know how many years ago. I think we met at a course at Kevin Neald's place. I don't know which one it was. I don't know if I've been to a bunch there, whether it was like a PRI course or whatever, one of the courses he was hosting. I think we met way back, probably in the early 2010s, 2013, 2014, something like that. And I've just had the pleasure of watching your career develop and you build Rehab2Perform over the last decade or so, and really start to scale and grow yourself as a practitioner, but really grow yourself as a businessman. And so this opportunity, Brendan and I don't always take a lot of interviews, but we wanted to try to talk to people who I think are in our community of coaches or therapists, people who I think are a good reflection of the values and things that we care about in this industry. And talk to you so the other people in our industry can kind of, one, learn about you, but also take some lessons from your experiences that have been helpful to you and then hopefully apply them for themselves. So, why don't you kind of, give a little background about yourself, where you're from, and kind of how you got into physical therapy and where you are now.
Yeah, so for me, I think a lot of the roots start probably back in my younger years. 2 different tracks. I had this very, very active, outgoing personality, played a lot of different sports, was very, very much into the sciences. You can kind of see where that's going with regards to potentially ending up in a career like physical therapy, where you're talking a lot, you're on your feet, you're working with active clientele. And then there's this other track where I kind of had the entrepreneurial bug at a very, very young age. I was doing newspapers actually as early as middle school, where I was the paper boy. That spun off then into swim lessons and lacrosse lessons when I was in high school. I actually created my first company, a lacrosse services company, when I started out in college, which is the sport that I ended up playing. So there's kind of these different touch points where these 2 things are developing in parallel. And I eventually got hurt at Ohio State and had such a good experience with my rehab process while I was in the sports medicine environment there, how healthcare was communicated to me, how I was challenged, how connected I was with the environment in a situation where sometimes it can be very, very tough not to be with your teammates out on the field. And it was just so easy for me to go, this is what I'm going to do when I'm older. And it was not until after the time in which I'd gone through the rehab process and was going home for summer after my sophomore year, where I went home and I got to experience healthcare as it really is, which was just a very, very underwhelming environment, underwhelming experience. Think you're sterile, white walls, very, very much like physician type of environment. That was how PT was being portrayed. I remember leaving after my second session and going, I'm never going back, because the 2 times that I went were very, very much like early stage stuff I was doing at Ohio State. It just felt so remedial. So I felt like this person really couldn't speak my language. The environment wasn't set up to really support me. I remember just being in there and kind of going, wow, like, it's so quiet. Nobody talks to each other. I just can't see myself coming back here. I'd rather just go to the gym and honestly talk to my PT and ATC over the phone. And that was kind of where the whole idea came from. I wanted to create this Division I athletics environment, having seen other things like the old Athletes Performance back in the day, places like Fisher Sports, some of these places that were a little bit more designed towards like the higher elite level clientele. And sitting here and kind of going, well, why can't we do this for Gen Pop? And that's really honestly where the whole idea of Rehab2Perform came about.
It's amazing how common the experience that you described is, that the light bulb, you had that moment where you saw someone as a therapist who made you say, I want to do this for a living. Like an athlete who has an injury, that experience opened it up for you. I know for me, actually, I also had a shoulder labrum injury. In high school, and I had a repair. And that experience to me was like, I really want to work in the sports setting, whether it's in rehabilitation or sports performance. I was rehabbing at the Health Point, where at the time was where the Celtics practiced, and they had a really great private facility there where, they got us to lift weights. And I went back to my team and I was doing the exercises they would give me. I would train, and I would go to PT, and it was this whole kind of enveloped experience. And I saw the great experience, and similar to you, later on in my career, I also saw the negative, right? So it's valuable for you to see what you also don't want to experience or what you don't want to be able to deliver to other people. So it's amazing how common when you talk to people in our field who kind of have that same experience, where there was a practitioner that showed them, oh, this is something that is an opportunity that I could do for a living, that I could pursue in my career as well.
Absolutely. I mean, when I look back at it, Janine Ullman, and she's actually since been promoted. She's an assistant AD at Ohio State now. But she was that first person for me that really kind of shed a new light. And I remember going back to see her in the fall of my junior year. And she was like, welcome to healthcare, Josh. This is a bubble that you're in. And I kept thinking to myself, well, why is it such a bubble, and why does it have to be such a bubble? And our relationship grew. My relationship with the strength coaches while I was there grew, the athletic trainers, and then trying to find places where I could interact with people that were doing stuff outside of the box, or more like that Division I athletics and pro environment. I can think about places like Mike Boyle, similar area. You've got John Paloff up there. You've got Mike Reinald, some people that I definitely sought insight from and to learn from through those early years. But it really wasn't until I went through a little bit of working for other people after graduate school where I started to kind of have a better idea of where I wanted to take things from a business standpoint. And as you mentioned, and we'll dive into, there's a whole lot of a difference between being the clinician, wanting to do things a certain way, and then being able to actually put that into practice from a business standpoint.
Yeah, and it sounds like, from an early age, you probably had a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset. You mentioned a paper route, you mentioned swimming lessons, you mentioned a sports business, and also something else you hear a lot with people is like, I think it's important, or a lot of people sometimes, I don't know, naturally have that where they think, I'm just going to go out and get it for myself or build something that I think suits me. So you either have freedom and autonomy or can deliver a product or service that kind of aligns more with your values than if you went and worked somewhere else. And so you mentioned when you first got out of school, you probably worked some other places, but at what point did you say, hey, I really want to dive in and build the vision of what I want and go into business for myself? Because it's a big leap. I think there's a lot of fitness professionals listening who, especially now more than ever, with that internet and the way things with COVID have gone over the last few years, think, okay, I want to be self-employed and I want to be an entrepreneur. What kind of pushed you to make that jump in your career to just dive in and start Rehab2Perform? Is that what you started with originally?
Yeah, I think for me, I knew that I needed to develop, and it wasn't until later where I actually could kind of put a term on them. But for me now, I'll communicate it as the 3 C's. I needed to have intellectual capital, financial capital, and social capital. When it came to the intellectual capital, I needed to be able to deliver a high quality service, or knew how to deliver a high quality service. And I needed to have baseline business practice. Then from a financial capital standpoint, I needed to be good at personal finance and business finance. And then the social capital piece, I needed to be able to tie myself into 2 different communities. One was my professional community, and then the other one was the community in the area in which I was looking to serve. So I graduated in May of 2011. I knew who the 2 private practice owners in the area were that I thought potentially would be good places to learn. And I worked for both of them. And it was not until about 3.5 years in where I put myself in a situation where I could cut the cord. Fortunately, I had that lacrosse services company where we had camps, clinics, club teams. That ended up developing into a 280 kid program. So that side hustle was a great place for me to learn business practices, honestly screw up a decent amount, while then having the income to cut the cord and kind of push the chips all to the center, where I no longer had the security of my day job. And then it was, December of 2014 where I, signed our first sublease. We were in a, 1,200 square foot facility in between 2 turf fields, paying about $2,100 a month, flat rate. We had access to the gym facility there. At that point, it's a dream. And I can still remember the day where, honestly, on day 1, we did not have the flooring finished. We had treatment tables out in the gym space on the turf, waiting for the floor guy to finally show up on time. So, it's kind of interesting to look back on it, but it's been quite the journey. And yeah, would you do stuff a little bit differently? Potentially, but hey, I wouldn't be where I am today without all of those experiences, good or bad.
Yeah, you just kind of hit the ground running and figure it out as you go. And you mentioned something that was really interesting. You talked about, having a side hustle that turned into something that actually gave you the freedom to launch the main thing that you wanted. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to entrepreneurship or starting a business, they think they just have to dive in. And what they don't realize is behind what they see, what other people are doing, there's usually something that people are doing on the side to help start to transition them out of their 9-to-5 or their day job that they want to get out of. And what you mentioned was it was a safe space or an incubator for you to fail safely and start to learn things before you could start to level up to something else that probably had larger consequences, more money behind it, and was ultimately a bigger risk. And so something I tell a lot of our staff, we have a lot of people who work for us who we also encourage to be entrepreneurial and build a brand while they still are with us, or develop, businesses within our business, as we have with CFSC or MBSC Online or MBSC TV, all these other kind of umbrella businesses that we have at MBSC. I always tell them, like, hey, start now, because we're going to give you just enough to start to make some money, learn how to do things on your own, start to make mistakes safely so that we can grow it into something larger. And I think that's important, because I think a lot of people think you just show up and start a business, but in reality, there was a lot of practice probably in that sports services business for years prior where you learned a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you hit the nail on the head when you said incubator. And I think that the thing that I had the ability to do was to take something I was really, really good at in an environment where there's absolutely little to no risk, which is when I was in college, right? You're literally trying to make beer money for when you're in college during the summers. Like you're taking private lessons on, you're doing clinics. And I got to a point where I built a camp up that actually ended up having almost 90 kids at one point. But, fast forward to about 10 years later, and you put yourself in a situation where, then you have 280 kids, and it just kind of compounds. It wasn't something that happened right out of the gates. It was a byproduct of that private lesson that I had done in swimming, where I was doing private lessons in small groups in swimming. So a lot of people look at successful people or a successful business, and they maybe run into this comparison game that I think we're all guilty of at one stage or the other, but they forget all of the different steps that went into, and I'm a big believer in the aggregation of marginal gains, but you're aggregating all of these different marginal gains in a wide variety of different areas. And if I, oversimplified it with regards to the 3 C's there, I mean, there's obviously so many more things that kind of compound and allow you to put yourself in a position where, at this stage of the game, we feel like we're a snowball kind of going down that mountain a little bit versus the beginning. You're just looking to put a couple flakes together.
Yeah. And it reminds me of talking with Mike Boyle, talking about MBSC growing into a business, him talking about at the time he was an athletic trainer at Boston University. He wasn't a strength and conditioning coach. He's an ATC by license, and they didn't even have strength and conditioning back then. And so he was working as an ATC, but then just training them on the side, not getting paid for extra time. And over time, then was training the kids in the summers when he wasn't working with them, running camps. Right. And over time, these camps had grown until the point where he started like a real private business. It was like, I have to hire some people. And then eventually convinced Boston University to just hire him as a strength coach instead, because they didn't have a strength coach, where he was just training all the athletes. And then eventually that became Mike Boyle Strength Conditioning out of, years of him, running camps, starting to do it voluntarily, doing things on the side, and eventually into the business that it is today. And so there's a lot of legwork and, like you said, trial and error and practice that kind of goes into figuring that out. And so now if we kind of fast forward to launching Rehab2Perform, where was the first location? Because you have, 7 locations now? Is that correct? 7,
soon to be a couple more here, to be honest. We're in a situation where we're kind of feeling confident. Went through the pandemic. It was a very, very validating time period for us, and we're going to kind of keep rolling the dice. But to answer your original question, started in Frederick. Feel very, very fortunate that the community, although it can be a little bit of kind of that quote unquote good old boys network, after about 2 years kind of has really, really opened up to us and embraced us. We're actually in the process of expanding our facility there and adding about 80% to the square footage, going from a 5,000 square foot space to a 9,000 square foot space. So it started, though, not necessarily in our own brick and mortar, but it started in a sublet space. So another, example of like even what you see was not what you got initially, especially during a situation where we were sharing space. We're in a sublet facility. We're in the middle of sporting fields. You can't control the noise. You can't control the music. You can't control when cleaning is done. You can't control the branding. And you put yourself in a very, very safe to fail environment. And then eventually get to a point where within about 18 months? Yeah, about 18 months, we were in a situation where we honestly got asked to leave, which is always an interesting story. The space, the owner of the facility had a personal training company. And needless to say, we were doing really well. And it's not to speak negatively about the personal training company, but he just wanted us to be feeding the personal training company that was there more. Now, a big part of our business is relationships out in the community with a lot of different entities. And if we are to start to kind of chop, our referrals or cut things at the knees, so to speak, by using somebody who had entrusted us with a client to then feed this other entity just because we were sharing space, that's just not a good way to do things. And we had complained about the music. I mean, there were certain time periods, and we can get into a whole thing when it comes to culture. But, when you're walking around with young females and there's certain music that's a little bit questionable, and you're having to make excuses for that side of things, you're having to make excuses for cleanliness and all of these things that you just aren't in control of. You're hoping in the back of your mind that you have the opportunity to create abundance where you can put yourself in a situation. But instead, we just got pushed into a situation where we didn't realize it at the time. But when we opened up that new space, it must have been just what people needed to know that we were a validated product. Because after we went into that new space, our growth trajectory has just been significant. Not only there, but throughout the rest of the company. But I always tell people, I've been thrown out of a lease before, and that's not something to be proud of. But it's one of those things that hopefully people can look at and go, you don't have to necessarily compromise your ethics and morals as it relates to business to do well. And sometimes you holding your ground and putting you in a situation where I think we had about 2 months to find a lease, and for anybody or find a space, for anybody who knows like lease negotiation and stuff, like that doesn't work out very well. Like
no,
normally you need like maybe 6 months, not 2, but it worked out really, really well. We went into low, we didn't get a whole lot of our ass when it comes to the space. It pretty much got delivered shell, and I turned into a really good general contractor in a short period of time. But July 2016, we're actually just finally, tearing up the turf right now and doing some renovations in the current space while also adding space to the area next to it.
I was just going to ask you what year that was, so it kind of gives you a good timeline of when you went to there to where you are now, and the story represents a really good, a few good things. I think one that something that seems like it could be an absolute disaster for a business, right? You being kicked out on 2 months' notice actually was almost like rocket fuel for you, because you were able to show up in your business authentically the way that represents you and, like you said, your values and your business, and something that your customers really recognized. We actually talked with our interns last week about the music specifically. And Mike, it's like a big thing at the gym about Mike talking about hey, the music has to be X because we don't want it to be offensive. And I think back to a situation where I talked with a parent. We have a competitor on the other side of town, pretty similar type of business. And he had brought his daughter there, 15-year-old girl, to work out. And he walked in, and it was a bunch of high school and college age guys with no shirts on, blasting obscenities and music in there. And he goes, we immediately turned around and walked out. And so what Mike always says, we're trying to create a space where when anybody who comes in there feels like I can leave my kid with you, or my elderly clients who come in who are in their 80s feel like, okay, this isn't completely outside of somewhere where I feel comfortable, and my high school and my college and high school football kids can come here and still feel like they can get a good workout, and trying to create a culture intentionally when people come in. And so we were talking about the idea of never lose a customer. Again, the idea that you only have a small window to create someone into a long-term customer, and first impressions go a really long way in doing that. And so with you changing your location, you were able to kind of represent your business more authentically, like you said, and that actually propelled you guys as opposed to destroying you when you kind of got pushed out of that lease on short notice.
Yeah, and there's 2 small things, a cleaning schedule and a music playlist. But those are things that people see and feel. They tie immediately into your senses. There's nothing worse than walking into an F-bomb and dust that is significantly accumulated in a particular area of the facility, especially when it comes to some of those black rubber floors where it can be very, 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 very prominent. That, among other things, I think just puts you in a situation where people are walking in and you want to make sure that they're getting that 10-star experience where they're getting all of these different touch points that allow them to interact with, feel, see, hear. And by the time they're done, they just feel, hey, I'm in the right place. And one of those things being significantly off, obscenities and cleanliness especially, can be really make or break, outside of the fact that you have to have at least a solid service. And I'm not even saying a high level service. You just have to have a solid service and then good humans who have the emotional intelligence to connect.
And so if we're thinking this is July 2016, you're just in this new space. I'm assuming you probably have, how many people do you have working for you at that time?
Ooh, 6, 7?
6. So there's a handful of you. I'm assuming at this point you mentioned, you were general contractor. You're probably also therapist, also owner, CEO. You're probably wearing a lot of hats at this point.
Yep. Doing bookkeeping and who knows what else. Yeah.
And at what point did you really start to think, okay, I need to, shift from my practitioner hat, my everyday coach hat, therapist hat, to I need to start to create systems and become a CEO or become a manager and level myself up in this business? I think about the idea of E-Myth or Traction, where they talk about, the woman making the pies. You can't make the pies and be the electrician and be the bookkeeper and be the accountant. At what point did you really start to think, okay, I need to change how I run this business if it's going to be sustainable and be able to grow and be able to deliver it the way that I want?
I think the problem, honestly, with us having our own brick and mortar is that was almost like putting lighter fluid on a fire. Like we'd started to do well, and opening up that office actually, like I mentioned, propelled us to this new success and this more rapid growth, which then about 15 months later, we were opening up our second office. And it was not until the second office opened that I got the absolute smack in the face that I needed to kind of take a step back. And I say that because the opening the second location was such a disaster. The biggest issue that I had actually was I made some errors when it came to our insurance contracting. And just to provide some context for everybody listening, we accept a majority of the insurances that are out there. And when setting up your business LLC and then going and doing contracting, there are certain decisions you can make. And I took advice from somebody that maybe had only kind of gone down one tunnel, and maybe they hadn't communicated to a lot of people. So I got one person's opinion who maybe have only done it once or reached out to one person themselves, because I found out that they are an anomaly, or they're an outlier. But I didn't realize that because I didn't reach out to other people. And we actually didn't get paid at the new office for the first 3 months.
Oh my God.
I had to let go somebody that I had hired when I found out that we were going to be unable to get paid for that long, because that's about how long some of the contracts take to kind of get you in the network. I had to let somebody go within the first week of that office opening up, because I knew that we were not going to be able to financially have this endpoint of when we're going to actually be able to provide for this person. It's a tough thing for me to say. It's probably top 2 biggest failures and things that I still think about regularly. That individual went to PT school with me, and she still has not spoken to me to this day. So not a very, very good moment. Definitely something I look back on where I think also when you talk about work-life balance, that was the time period of my life where I probably slept the least. Because of some of the different things going on. You don't realize how important systems and processes are. You don't realize how people dependent your business instead of process dependent your business is. And I didn't probably have a full appreciation for the different shortcomings that I had. So it was after that, I'd done some small stuff with Small Business Development Center. I'd done some small stuff with SCORE. Those are 2 really good resources for anybody looking just to get general business practices. But I dove into a program called Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. It is a combination of Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, and Babson College, which is one of the better entrepreneurial schools across the country. And I immersed myself in what I think I was cohort 3 for Baltimore. And I was going to Johns Hopkins 1 or 2 times a week. There was some stuff that I'd be working on my own. There was some stuff that I'd be doing in full day classroom settings with other entrepreneurs that had businesses. So people that had a business kind of going through this mini MBA. And I, outside of more recently, probably hadn't had as much of the imposter syndrome vibe as I did while being in that environment. And, when you're with 30 some other people and you're on the low end of the revenue side of things, you're on the low end of staff, you're a little bit intimidated because you're not sure about whether or not your questions are going to be laughed at, or if stuff that you're going through is stuff that any of these other people had gone through, or if people were going to actually see, like, how the heck did you get your company to be this successful? You actually don't know anything. But fortunately, as a result of going through that program, like if I look back at like timelines of personal development for me and what I needed to do to get us kind of over these mini mountains, right? I mentioned pushing the snowball up. Like, can we push it up to the next peak, so to speak, and at least rest before we continue the climb? And that was a pivotal moment. We got to a point where then the second office became profitable shortly after I finished up the program there. And and then you're looking at 3 and 4, and then the pandemic hit. So it was what I needed at the time, not just for myself but for our team. And I would not be who I am, and we would not be where we are without that program. And it's something I recommend to a lot of people that are, I think, I'm trying to think of what the revenue target, I think, was only like 500,000. Like, it wasn't anything crazy. It maybe was $1 million, but for anybody that's kind of in that space where you're trying to get over that 7-figure hump and really, really establish yourself, it's a great fit, and they have them across the country.
It really speaks to you intentionally seeking out a situation of discomfort so you could grow, right? I think there's a lot of business owners who, and like you said, they can get to that initial stage where, you're paying your bills, you're paying yourself, you're paying your employees, but to really be able to continue to level up, whether it's different locations or increase your revenue, and to really grow a business, you need to put yourself in a situation where you have to develop new skills, learn new skills, and be uncomfortable. I think especially for fitness professionals or rehab professionals who don't have a business acumen, a degree from Babson, a degree from Bentley, one of these entrepreneurial school and programs where they learn the basics of entrepreneurship and business, they feel, like you said, they have imposter syndrome. I think a lot of us, I can speak for myself, have felt it all the time in the business sense, to say, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But then you get in a environment like that and it completely propels you because you've developed a whole new skill set that you didn't have that got you to, like you said, maybe the revenue was $500,000. You have to develop a new skill set to then get to $1 million or get to $2 million and so on and so forth to be able to continue to grow forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, if I can look back on it, I remember walking in and the section that was by far the most beneficial for me was a word that I don't think I'd ever even thought of before going into that program, and it's operations. And when you talk about operations, you're thinking about your operating system. We are here interacting with technology, and there's a base operating system that kind of underlies the technology functioning just at a baseline without adding all of these extra things to upgrade. And when I think of a business that's got really, really good operations, I think of a business that has a lack of friction and is something that is repeatable and is something that's very, very efficient. So it takes as few steps as possible. And we had operations, but they were solely in people's brains, and they weren't in a manual, they weren't in a video. It was something that was not consistent or shared amongst people. And we were just relying on the fact that we had hired really, 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 really well. It wasn't until going through that operations block where we had stuff like a front desk operations manual and a marketing manual and stuff for onboarding and stuff that I look back on that, like, you mentioned doing things that you don't make money off of, but are just pivotal. Like, the only way that you can create abundance is by actually going through a period of time where you're almost like you have this scarcity associated with what it is that you're doing. Like, you're not creating anything other than something that is needed, and it's not leading to a direct ROI, but that indirect byproduct of what it is that you just put together, like, comes back to help you out like 10x, because you move forward and make more bold decisions, or you're less worried about potentially people leaving because you have things in place to make sure that when you add people, well, here we go. We're at base operating system. Sorry, you have no choice, but the floor has been brought up here as a result of the operations and the things that we put in place versus when we were in that phase of the company, you add people and it's like, oh my gosh, well, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean you don't know how to do it? It's so easy. Like, you're looking at people and a number one question, and not to dive too deep into this, but the number one question that we always ask, even to this day, to people that are unable to do things at a level in which we want them to, what can we do to provide you with to ensure that you will end up with this result? Because we have, X, Y, and Z, and despite having X, Y, and Z, like we didn't end up where we want to get to. So what can we do to change these things over here? Instead of pointing a finger at the individual, the finger is almost always pointed at the process.
That's amazing. And because so often you have managers say, I don't know why they didn't understand this. It always goes back to, why didn't I do a good enough job to set them up for success to get the result that we wanted?
Yes.
Because I think early on when you're a manager, if you haven't understood that, you can bang your head off the wall over and over and say, oh, this person doesn't get it. This person doesn't get it. And often as you mature in that position, you realize I didn't do a good enough job demonstrating to them or teaching them what I needed them to do. And that's a hard lesson to learn sometimes. And I think that you really hit something really important there. And it's the process of creating operations. You have to understand the idea of like delayed gratification, right? It's, if you're anybody in our field, probably if you're fitness or rehab professional, you probably don't enjoy that type of work where you're writing out a manual or writing out processes and operations. It's kind of mind numbing to do, especially if it's something that you already have in your head. It's something that like you understand, but other people don't. And because you don't get an immediate gratification out of doing it. It's not like when you make an Instagram post and a bunch of people like it and share it and tell you it's great. The truth of the story is you might get a dopamine hit from that, something like that, but it doesn't help you build your business. Whereas spending the time doing the boring work, writing an operations manual, doing staff training, planning your operations are what will help a business grow. And then years from now, all of a sudden you can see the result of the work that you did.
100%. And if I can just use a quick quote that I always will reference, companies compete on process. They don't compete on vanity metrics. They don't compete on likes, impressions. Some of that stuff absolutely helps, but they compete on the process. And even if I dive into some of the vanity metrics, likes, and stuff like that, there's still a process to having some of that stuff be sustainable. So, we'll just continually sit back and ask the question. And we're going through it again this week. And we have a sales and marketing review on Wednesday where, okay, what's working? How do we know what's working? All right, what do we need to do differently? And everybody's kind of putting in this group thought. And I always will kind of tie it back into like, we need to be like the iPhone. Like the iPhone, and I could even say like Tesla cars at this point in time, like they have regular updates. And there's no greater, kind of feeling, hopefully for the people there, other than the fact that they're on this continual search for best. They're continually seeking out best practice, and there's no fixed mindset in the group or in those companies. You wouldn't come out with these repeated updates that people need or that better people's lives unless you had the mindset of that individual that's on a continuous search for and if it's the individual, it's self-actualization. But obviously a company's not necessarily self-actualizing. A company's trying to help people self-actualize. But you're on a continual search for best practice. And I think that, for people out there that are trying to determine whether or not they're entrepreneurial, that's probably one of the number one questions you should ask yourself is like, how curious are you to figure out best? How curious are you to search for a best practice? And even when you think you've reached it, like, are you still figuring out if you can kind of tinker it a little bit? It's almost like I call myself sometimes like a tinkerer. I'm continually like looking at something. I'm going, I feel like we could do something a little bit. It's like it's at 99.9, but I know there's something a little bit more that we could be doing.
Yeah, we always say in our staff meetings, so Mike always says, like, we'll never find the perfect program. We'll never find the perfect way to run the gym, but we're going to continue to try to do it. And so much so that if, like, you've ever visited the gym, people who come, our clients especially, are like, they leave on a Friday and they come back Monday and it's rearranged. Because we're like, we thought logistically it could run a little bit smoother if we moved this equipment here. Or like one time they left on a Thursday, came in on Monday, and the turf was ripped up and our rubber on our flooring was replaced. And we moved stuff. We're like, we need a little bit more space here. And we're continually thinking about, okay, what will help things run a little bit more smoothly? What equipment do we need or do we need to change to make sure we can run the groups that we want? Or how do we have to set up our staff meetings to be more efficient with our time? All of these little things over time are cumulative. And as your business grows and changes, you're going to have to continue to do it more, right? Because the way your business is going to run will be differently. I also,
interject. Yeah. It's like the meeting thing. And that, like, we're at a stage right now where we're just trying to get better at meetings. You know, you have these different areas of the company. You have different niche services that people are trying to offer. You have different layers of your team. You have different locations. So you're also not trying to burden people with meetings. But yeah, it's it sounds so boring, but sometimes it's the monotonous and very, very tedious tasks that really separate you. And not to, again, dive too deep into that direction, but the number one question that I'll ask people when I'm doing consulting or coaching with them from a business standpoint is talking about their actual tasks during a week. And too few people actually are willing to write down all of the different tasks that they do on a regular basis, knowing that it'll actually get them to a point where they can figure out where they need to outsource or where they need to hire. Like, it's not sexy. That's like the number one way to figuring out stuff that you're going to keep on your plate or not keep on your plate. But unfortunately, everybody wants to do things that almost have like this immediate gratification, as opposed to, like you were referencing earlier, these things that build a foundation and end up with significant delayed gratification later.
Yeah. And what I heard you say too, kind of maybe indirectly, was like, one, the operations. That's really what has allowed you to scale the way that you want and compete and grow this business. And the other piece is having really great people. Right? I think if you have those two things, you can have businesses that have good operations but poor people. You can have great people but poor operations. The two things together is really what makes you grow. And they feed each other, right? Because with your great operations, you'll be able to grow, which means you have to hire more people. And if you're sourcing great people, then you're bringing more people in your organization who are going to continue to help you grow. You're going to bring people in who are strong at things that you're not strong at, who can bring different viewpoints. And one thing I've seen is, at least from my perspective, you have a lot of really great people there. I know a few people who, who either intern or work for us, or people I know, guys like Eric Chow or Anthony Ionaro, who work for you down there. And so what has been for you, do you have a process of how you vet people or how you hire people that helps you figure out how do these people fit at Rehab2Perform? How do these people fit into our culture, into our community, to make sure that they're going to fit in and help your company grow the way that you want?
Here's a question for you. How many people that work at MBSC were interns at one point or another?
Almost 100%.
Okay, we're not almost 100%, but we're about 60 to 70%. So I hate to say this, but hopefully it's probably a kind of a kudos for Mike. But I think he was one of the people early on that I should probably giving more credit for placing such a significant emphasis on the internship program. Within the second year, and it wasn't the first year, we started to have high school interns, college interns, and eventually DPT student interns. Last year, in 2021, we had 58 DPT interns throughout the course of the year. This past March, and for anybody who's in the PT world, they know how significant the March mailer is. It's a time where almost all the schools are sending out their dates or their slots in which they're looking to have your facility, your company, host their students. we had 81 universities reach out. And that's just kind of a byproduct of us creating relationships, creating a good experience, creating relationships, creating good experience. And that'll continue to be something that we, kind of focus on. I mean, if you can run a business that delivers an amazing service, why can't you also put process in place to make, honestly, what a lot of people are struggling with right now, which is hiring, a non-issue? I just went to a business industry conference, and the amount of people that are complaining about staffing, and I'm sitting here and going, we literally have our next 5 to 10 hires already mapped out. We know the 4 people that we're bringing on at the end of the summer already. We know people that we're already talking to bring on later in the year, but you create a deep bench when you have an internship program. And it's not just about having an internship program, it's about being intentional about the internship program. Because when you're intentional about the internship program, the people that interact with it, they feel it. They feel that it's different, especially when they have the opportunity to go through, for some of them, 3 to 5 different internships before they finish DPT school. They walk in and they go, God, everything else was awful compared to my experience here, But because we put time and energy in, we're doing things to actually support them, not just A, either put them in the corner, B, give them towels and a squirt bottle, or C, just have them come in and see all of the patients. Because if I had to summarize 90% of the conversations we have with students, they're going to fall into one of those 3 different buckets, where they're either doing nothing, they're aiding, or they're potentially just working and they almost feel like they should be collecting a full-time paycheck. So the internship program for us was a no-brainer, and it's definitely paid us off. When you look at our team, like I said, 60 to 70% of the people have been through the internship program.
Yeah, I always say, for us, it lets them almost interview you and figure out, do I fit in the culture here? Is this an environment I want to work in? Or these the people I want to be around? And for you, you get essentially a 3-month interview out of them. Anyone can sit down at an interview and make a nice resume and CV and put on the persona that they think you want. But seeing them work for however long you have them for an internship, you can really figure out, okay, who fits. And it almost like by the end of it, it's kind of apparent to both sides that this is going to be a good fit for you. This is going to be a good fit for us. And it's the same exact thing for us that right now this is the essentially the 3rd week. They have a week of staff training where we just train and educate and practice. And then we got into the first week of summer last week with about 20 interns for our summer. We have 20 over the course of the summer between our 2 locations that we split up. And for us, we're hitting the ground running. We're already starting to figure out, okay, who seems to be a good fit, who might be potential hires as we get towards August, who we're going to keep. And for us, that's a consistent feeder system of young talent and young coaches in the area who we can immediately bring on and have them ready to work on day one, because they just spent the last 3 months with us, essentially practicing, learning, and assisting and growing with us early in their career.
Try before you buy, and that goes both ways, right? We try before we make a decision. They try before they make a decision. But I think, much like you're mentioning, the level of investment that we put into them just as a student makes them optimistic about the fact that if they join the team, that there's going to probably be even more significant of an investment. And I think, at least speaking for a business that is, and I'm sure it's very similar, I think 46 or 47 out of about 52 employees at this point are millennials. If you're speaking to the millennial, they want to know what's in it for them. They want to know how the company is supporting their growth. They want to know what the company is doing to not just take care of them professionally, but personally. And I think when you see touch points of that and you hear about it from, the team when people are interning, it makes these conversations much easier where, we send out a casual Google form at the end of the DPT internship, and we know how many people want to work with us, what locations they want to work at. And then there's obviously a second part of that, a bookend of the staff there. What do the staff there think of this person? Is this person hireable? And it makes the current climate right now, I'm worrying about things that a lot of other people are maybe not able to, because they're stuck back at this step of just attracting talent.
I think we're back to you. Yeah, the recording kept going, so we're good.
Yep, all good on my end.
But I kind of speak to the internship idea. You said the investment, I think, is really important, and something that we've kind of learned over the time is like we really go intentionally to build a curriculum where from day one we have they have to get a big binder where there's articles, there's books, there's weekly meetings, weekly educational time that we're trying to invest into them. And like you said, what I've kind of learned now with this population that we have, you said, like, I'm mostly millennials. I'm, besides Mike and Bob, I'm the oldest person that works there, and I'm 34. And so we're continually trying to invest as much energy we can into training and education, whether that's providing them opportunities to do education once they're hired, give them a stipend, and then continually providing education, bringing in speakers throughout the year. This is something that's really attractive to them, but it's also something that lifts our business and continually rises the tide of education, so to speak, for everybody that's there. And our internship directors now, we have Ben Connolly and Dan McGinley who are doing it now. It's kind of have really taken it and continued to level it up where every single week our staff members, myself included, we're rotating through doing different curriculum with them. Hey, I have a meeting with them on Friday. I'm going to do a whole hour with the internships, with the interns, all on like assessment. And then next week, Dan will take it and do work on nutrition and how we kind of lay out our nutrition plan. And so by the time they get out of our, 12-week internship experience, we always say it's like they get that compressed 10,000 hours, and they come out the other side. If they're not going to be with us, we know we're going to be able to place them somewhere where they're going to be successful, and then that they almost become a flagship for us to find more interns and more help in the future. So it continues to compound and be a valuable hiring process for us, even if we don't necessarily take some of these people and hire them ourselves.
I'm waiting for Mike Boyle Staffing Agency.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay? Right? There's people out there that need trainers right now, and I'm just sensing an opportunity.
Exactly. Well, so now kind of fast forwarding to where you are now, where you're, going into like, you're looking to put in an 8th location. I think of this idea where they say like the 3 and 10 rule, that like every time your business grows in multiples of like 3 or 10, things have to change. Processes and operations have to change. And so now where you've significantly grown, you think since 2016 to where you are now in 2022, what have you seen over the last, like since COVID, I should say? I think you've grown significantly since the end of COVID. What are the challenges that you face personally as like a business owner in scaling now to the next level since then?
I think my personal wants are the biggest thing that I'm realizing that I have to at least shelve for a little while, if not potentially forever. And my personal wants are to connect, and I want to be, on a regular basis, connecting with our people and always spending time with them. But I actually don't get a ton done when I'm doing that. So kind of shelving my personal want with regards to presence and having these conversations and being in a situation where I'm seen all the time, and instead carving out a schedule where I have some time, 2 days a week, really at this point, where I kind of bookend my week where it's like, hey, I'm available, but I'm remote. I'm either at home, I'm in a coffee shop, but I'm somewhere where I literally can't get interrupted, because no matter what, if I take my laptop and I go to one of the offices and I'm sitting there and there's anybody around, I would much rather talk to all of the people than doing any of the things that involve a pen and a paper, G Suite, emails, or whatever project that I'm potentially working on at a given moment. So that's probably the hardest thing for me, just recognizing where your personal affinity is, but also recognizing where you're needed. Like, where is my seat on the bus the best? And it's not always in the driver's seat. Yeah, and that's something that I've definitely learned over the years, where I think my leadership style in the early years was the person that, you're running into battle with the flag in your hand and the sword, versus at this point in time, like there's moments for that. And there's moments where I have to kind of be out in front and be seen, or maybe take the initiative or take charge somewhere. And there's other situations where I'm kind of helping people be that person, and helping them kind of directly, and you hate using the word like direct reports, but like we're getting better at kind of segmenting, like, who is your team? Who is your team? Who is your team? And I'm actually having more conversations with them, helping them problem solve a little bit, putting them in a situation where they kind of have the same feelings I do sometimes, where I'm driving the bus, but sometimes they have their own, bus of people, and I need to help them kind of steer the ship. So I think those are probably the two biggest things: shelving my personal wants, and then recognizing that I'm not the person that necessarily has to be driving the bus at a given moment. And sometimes I might not even be on a bus, because that person has their people, and I've kind of waved for them, in the morning as they go about their route and spend time with and pick up the people that are a part of more their direct reports, or involved in a certain aspect of the company that I quite honestly don't have as much knowledge of anyway. Yeah. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about clerical stuff, front desk, some of the stuff from an insurance and billing standpoint. Like, I superficially know what's going on, but thank God we have some of the people we do, because I would have absolutely no clue. But that's, like you said, where you attract some of the right people, you help them with the process, and then you get, you kind of let them get to express their genius. And we have some people that are like just incredibly, incredibly intelligent in their different areas, whether it's, administrative side, marketing, ops, some of these things that really, really allow a company to kind of hit the gas pedal.
Yeah, it's a step in maturity for a business owner when you can begin to trust people, like you said, to show their own genius or execute in the way that they know best. Once you start to get processes in place and say, listen, now you can have your own team, you can build this, and you can report to me, we can check in from there. And it seems like you said about shelving your personal wants, often the place that we're needed is the place where there's the most discomfort. Like you said, sitting on the computer, in the G Suite, or doing whatever you have to do the legwork on the computer, whereas it'd be much more comfortable, I know, of speaking for myself as well, to be out on the floor, be going to talking to the coaches, talking to the interns, interacting with clients. But then the day goes by and you say, oh, I didn't get any of these really essential foundational things done that I need to get done today. And I find myself personally, like when I'm doing those things, you have that feeling like, oh, I should be out there, or I should be socializing. And in your head, you're saying that that's what I need to be doing for the business. But in reality, it's you rationalizing getting away from probably the things that you really need to be doing that are probably a little bit uncomfortable. But in reality, probably have the long-term payoff that we need to keep the business moving forward.
Otherwise, you become, and I've called myself it sometimes, you become the bottleneck.
Yeah.
That everybody is waiting to get unclogged before other things happen. Like, I did spend half of my day in the morning just at one of the offices just to catch up with 2 staff members on a small thing. But then I spent the rest of the day at home. And like the amount of stuff that I actually get done when there's no music, nobody else around, and I'm just locked in, and I'm a little bit, well, probably a lot of it, I got my ADD diagnosis when I was younger, but I figured out a flow. And like, regardless of how much blocking and tackling going on, normally it's a mix of like pieces are getting moved throughout the course of the day. Maybe I only had 15 minutes of attentiveness and I'm blocking it later, but I kind of find my flow a lot better in these periods of time where, there's no distractions. It sounds so simple, and I've heard it a million times, but sometimes you have to create a space where, you're able to block out distractions and actually get shit done.
Yeah, man. Well, it's really inspiring to hear your story, because I think there's a lot of fitness professionals and rehab professionals that want to look at probably what you're doing and think like, I really want to be able to have that. And so being able to hear from someone who, you started, like you said, subletting a space, to getting thrown out, to being in your own space and being probably overwhelmed, and then figuring out as you go, okay, this is how you become a business owner. This is how you grow and scale a business, to the point where you are now, where like you said, you're looking at location number 8, and with the eyes on continually growing and expanding Rehab2Perform into the future. So I think that, if you're listening to this as a fitness professional or a rehab professional, take to heart some of the things that Josh shared as far as operations, going into a place where it might be foreign to you, going to, like you said, a Goldman Sachs business accelerator program. I know there's a lot of things like that out there where you can go and learn and develop those skills. And ultimately, typically, you're going to come out the other side, a much different viewpoint or a much different business owner for going through that. So, I appreciate you spending the time tonight. This is a good hour of conversation. And before we wrap up, if there's anything or anywhere you'd like to point the people listening where they can find you, I know you're a good Twitter follow, but if there's anywhere where they can find your information and reach out to you, please go ahead and you can share that now.
Yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to me directly, Twitter, Instagram, or dare I say, TikTok now.
Oh, here we go.
I caved. Yeah. And I sit here as my wife, who's in the other room, just got a lead for real estate on TikTok. Like it's crazy. I got to jump in. I almost wish that I jumped in earlier, but that's at Dr. Josh Funk, at Dr. Josh Funk, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. And then for anybody that wants to keep track of anything and everything Rehab2Perform, it's going to be at Rehab2Perform. That's on TikTok, Instagram, and we have a Facebook group called R2 Peeps for anybody that wants to join in that. But yeah, happy to serve as a resource. I wouldn't be here if other people did not open their time, open their schedule, and then open up their brain to me. I try my best to pay it forward, and I'm always happy to jump on or help people troubleshoot for little things here and there.
All right, and I'll put all that information and links in the show notes, so if you're listening to that, you'll be able to scroll right down and get that and find Josh, find Rehab2Perform. And thank you all for listening. Josh, thanks for taking the time, and have a great night.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.